Now, I do find it interesting that Putin actually took out 6 biological locations in the Ukraine that were all, by the way, funded and stood up and operated by our DoD. What are we doing in the Ukraine with biological weapon facilities? Even though they were supposed to be there for good purposes and studying and things of that nature. Definitely very odd, to say the least. Also find it odd that Putin is actually took over Chernobyl, one of the first things he did in that location, and that there is a spike in radiation there. So kind of a strange thing.
So starting off here by Ghost Start, US has 15 biolabs in Ukraine. In fact, the work in the laboratories is carried out under the program of biological experiments. The budget is $2.1 billion and is funded by the US Defense Threat Reduction Agency. These studies can be called dual-use studies for cures and WMDs. So yes, you wonder, why does the United States government have so many bioweapons labs in this country? Thinking of this in the context of the known corruption that already exists in the country, its strategic location as a conduit of various pipelines to the rest of Europe, and the country's numerous organic and inorganic resources, it would seem that Putin has the ability to exert a lot of pressure, both internationally and specifically on the United States, for these reasons. So what I'd like to establish in this video is that which you heard mentioned by Monkeyworks, this notion that several of the biowarfare laboratories were destroyed. So just searching bioweapons labs Ukraine destroyed, you get this article by Richardson Post. Okay, first, before going to that article, I'm just going to comment on a Snopes article, Ukraine-US Biolabs, an ongoing Russian disinformation campaign. I read through this article and I feel it was written with a great understanding of the geopolitical situation in this region, and also written in bad faith. So taking an approach of analysis to give credibility to the opposite of the assertions of the article, that increases the probability that indeed there were biolabs that were destroyed. There's not a lot that's useful in this particular debunking article. There is the important mention that not all of the areas where there were bombings overlapped with areas where there were biolabs, but some did. The article flatly refutes the notion that Veronicirus is a weapon, despite the fact that information has just been revealed within the last 4 days regarding the etiology of the furin cleavage site on the bug, suggests the extremely low probability that it occurred naturally. But this portion of the article makes it seem as though it's not even a controversy, that scientists aren't contending the possibility that the bug is not natural. And so that's an element of bad faith given the extent of research and good writing I see in this article. The second element suggesting bad faith is this portion here where they talk about how there was an agreement between the US Department of Defense and the Ministry of Health of Ukraine to, quote, stem the threat of bioterrorism by placing safeguards on deadly pathogens dating from the Soviet era biological weapons program. Look at this, quote, while the US Department of Defense Biological Threat Reduction Program provided some funding to upgrade biolabs in the Ukraine, these facilities are operated by the Ukrainian government under guidelines set under Ukrainian law. So the author is trying to state that just because the lab has been operated by the Ukrainian government, though received funding and support from the US government, that these cannot be considered US military installations. In my view, this is semantic nonsense. Clearly, the two governments have been working together for some end, and now US placed assets at these laboratories are being affected by the Russian invasion. So now we go to the Richardson Post article. I'll place a link to both this article and the Snopes article in the description. This particular article does not posit irrefutable evidence that specific labs were indeed destroyed. It does offer a theory about what's happening, and it's a theory that an iteration of was refuted by Snopes. The theory posed by this author, Hollow Waltz, is back when Bill Gates suggested there's going to be a bug number 2 that we should be anticipating, that Gates in fact spoke from a position of true knowledge, knowing that a deliberately antagonized Russia-Ukraine conflict in February, which, as you may recall, Alex Jones somehow received intel of in advance.
People on the earth who claim they're not with the New World Order Combine. Is war in February. And this is the type of time, like right before World War I, right before World War II.
Back in October, this was stated. So according to the theory, bug number 2 would be released due to the conflict, or perhaps if the conflict was averted. And that could be looked at as a type of desperation, because bug number 1 actually occurred because the WEF, Bilderberg Group, Opus Dei, Society of Jesus, Golden Dawn, whatever labels and associations you like to designate that are controlling everything, they're operating from a position of weakness in response to the natural progression of citizen desire for national sovereignty and a shifting Overton window with higher expectations for fair elections, improved technological standards to achieve such, putting the sociopaths who have been running the political systems of the world for centuries into a bind. This is the logic of as conditions improve becomes harder to control. So to restate things, the corporatocracy, using Newland and other agents, continued efforts in 2014 to establish a primary base for additional future operations in the Ukraine. Putin said he's not going with the Great Reset agenda. He knew what America was doing to the country, and so perhaps instigated by the West, or perhaps on his own, chose to go into the Ukraine to clean up the corruption and stop bug number 2 from being released. It would indicate that we really are at the end of the NWO endgame. This, of course, is all very hard to prove, and I do not have the time to cover this in this video, but potentially there are similar labs in Kazakhstan as well. The Snopes article tries to say that many claim that bug number 1 came from the Ukraine, but that's not really the case. Many aren't saying that. Most believe that it came from China. This is one of the centers of the true info war, in my view. This organization is charged with protecting a lot of people through the counter-information campaign. I'll read this tweet to you. On April 23rd, the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine acknowledged that there are biological laboratories in Ukraine that are under the control of the Pentagon. The statement of diplomats came after an open letter from the people's deputies about the threats posed by these research centers. There are biolabs in Ukraine titled the Biological Threat Reduction Program, studying the most dangerous viruses in the world. Russia has been accusing the globalists of creating bioweapons at the border. And so with this particular opinion, you can also edit in the possibility that Russia's incursion into Ukraine could be self-protective against the weapon labs. They don't want bug number 2, 3, 4, or whatever entering their country from a nearby nation. I'm now on Reddit for this particular one. U.S. Embassy just removed all of their Ukraine bioweapon lab documents from their website, links and post. The first link takes you to their website. Biological Threat Reduction Program. U.S. Department of Defense Biological Threat Reduction Program collaborates with partner countries to counter the threat of outbreaks of the world's most dangerous infectious diseases. It goes on to describe how they create a safe culture through biosecurity, biosafety, and biosurveillance measures. The fact sheet shows documents about various labs. You click on one and you're taken to this. The site can't be reached. DNS address could not be found. The good news is they are still archived. Yes, the Wayback Machine again saves the day. Here we have the Kharkiv Diagnostic Laboratory, and you see it lists the donor as the Department of Defense of the United States, beneficiary, Ministry of Health of Ukraine. You have the contractor team, Black & Veatch, Ukrainian subcontractors, Techno Project, and Macrochem. And so it appears these are just basic one-page fact sheets that talk about the establishment of each of these laboratories, as well as their registration numbers and dates of registration. So I just went to another one. It's a fact sheet for State Regional Laboratory of Veterinary Medicine, Luhansk Regional Diagnostic Veterinary Laboratory. I forgot to mention the USG investment is also listed, so it shows in US dollar amounts the total cost of the laboratory. There's a section of the document titled Transfer of Custody and Sustainment Memorandum of Understanding. Transfer of custody is in progress. So I wonder if this is the portion of the document detailing a contractual exchange of control from the United States to the Ukraine of a given laboratory. So a very obvious next step is, let's try to pull up some of these labs on a map. I pull up Luhansk on Google Earth, but then I try to pull up Krasnodonia Street, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, and basically I get no search results. So I'm not able to search any further. You search the name of the lab, same thing happens. The lab does, however, show up when you use Google Maps. So here's the Russia invades Ukraine map on Reuters, and it shows areas where there is fighting and areas that are controlled. So I showed you the lab in Luhansk. So note the nub here and this kind of topography there. So you see that as well. Here's a little nub there. Here's the Luhansk lab. It's right there. So it's like about off that part. So the lab is clearly in a now Russia-controlled area. You try to overlay the maps into transparency. You find things aren't really scaled correctly, but we'll just try the best we can here. So you have labs here, and to look for the areas where there's damage. So this is the first lab. It's in an area that's Russian-controlled. Looks like there might be one here and one there. And one there. I tried to fix the scaling for this location. It's close. Now try to adjust scaling for this location. It's right there. So that's potentially number 4. And now we did this location. So maybe a number 5 there. So I'm gonna take a look at this one specifically. Okay, so we're really looking for a city called Lutsk, Lutsk. Okay, so for these documents here on this Reddit, I'm not able to find one that specifically corresponds with a lab in Lutsk. This Reuters map I showed you before, however, does show you that there was a bomb in Lutsk, also in Brody and Lviv. There is a document that corresponds with a lab for the city of Lviv. It's this one right here. So you have the State Regional Laboratory of Veterinary Medicine, donor Department of Defense United States, beneficiary the State Committee of Veterinary Medicine Ukraine, renamed the State Veterinary and Phytosanitary Service of Ukraine. You have the cost of the laboratory, etc. So there clearly are some roughly corresponding locations to labs that have been shown to be under attack. At this point, we can only theorize and just hope in the grand summation of things, just acts supersede over evil acts. Oh yes, and I'll be remiss if I didn't mention this. You get it by searching the keyword Ukraine. Can't say it on YouTube. The children of Ukraine are subject to the worst forms of child labor, including in the production of, you know what, children also perform tasks in mining. Kamil, who I believe is pro-Ukraine, anti-Russian, he pulls in the broader context of that quote to show that it's particularly the children in the Donbass region and also in Russia-occupied Crimea who are vulnerable to this exploitation. But then you wonder about the article itself on dole.gov. Is it actually biased to be anti-Russian? Because then it also talks about children in Russia being forced to engage in child labor, which could be true. But you just sort of wonder about a specific anti-Russia bias in this website. By the way, Dole is the U.S. Department of Labor. Is this department clean of the harms against children? Nadia brings up a post in The Guardian. Babies for sale traces a global crackdown. Here the region is Lviv. That's the region of western Ukraine, which is less biased towards Russia compared to eastern Ukraine in the Donbass region. Another article about the psychological scars of Ukraine's human issue. Another article talks about a commercial baby business in Ukraine, women being hired for their wombs, now speaking out. So as Brian McNally shows, much of what appears to be going on in that part of the world seems as unreal, but it may merely be the fog of war covering very significant happenings that will not only have consequences for the balance of energy throughout the world, but also those groups dedicated to doing untoward harm to children. Together, we valiantly fight the information war. Till next time, Patriots, peace.